I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet tonight, and I pay my respects to the ancestors past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to Maxine and to all of her community and her nation. I bring greetings from the Alyawarre people to her and to all of you. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Our beautiful country is burning. Last month, while I was thinking about this talk, better put these on, great expanses of our ancient and fragile home were on fire. Whole towns were destroyed, lives lost, hundreds of homes incinerated, countless animals and insects were killed by the flames. Smoke blanketed our cities and suburbs. This is unprecedented in the human habitation of this continent. For 65,000 years or more, our First Nations cared for and sustainably regulated the diverse nature of ecosystems of this place. Looking after country was our job. We cherish the land, understanding that our health relies upon its health. However, in less than 250 years of colonisation, our knowledges and practices, developed and refined over millennia, have been marginalised, just as we have. Our adaptability, creativity and wisdom has been ignored, sidelined or suppressed, or even seen of no value whatsoever. Our ability to care for country has been profoundly undermined. The results are all around us. Everywhere we look, we see the damage being done to the living systems that sustain life by drought and fire, exacerbated by the climate emergency, and by those industries that take from the land but give nothing back. We see the increasing numbers of ever larger, ever fiercer bushfires, ferocious fires. We see the rivers run dry. We see the oceans filled with rubbish and toxins. We are in crisis that poses an unparalleled threat to the sustainability of life in this land, if not the planet. This crisis poses a threat to the environment, the economy and our health. I mean health in its widest application. How can we, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or non-Indigenous alike, enjoy freedom, justice and peace if our land is burning? But we First Nations have the knowledge that can help heal the country. Our Indigenous knowledges could help halt and turn back the destruction we see. And over the last few weeks, more and more Indigenous people around the world have been echoing similar things. As Marandu Yana, a prominent man and activist from North Queensland said recently, this is quoted in an article written by Alexis Wright, which appeared in, of all things, the New York Times. I quote, "The greatest thing we have to offer today is our humanity, because this is all we've ever had." This evening, I want to talk about how the Uluru Statement from the Heart provides a roadmap, not just for healing past injustices, but for creating a future where our First Peoples' knowledges can be reintegrated into the life of the nation. Let me take you back almost 3 years to May 2017, when several hundred First Nations delegates met at Uluru in the heart of this land. We were there to consider proposals for constitutional reform, proposals that genuinely recognise our place here as First Peoples. This meeting, however significant, was not the first step. It followed an extensive process of what we called regional dialogues around the country, held over the year leading up to the convention at Uluru. These regional dialogues were the first time in Australia's history that we as First Nations sat down across the nation in a formal manner to deliberate on constitutional matters. As such, they were a significant, if much belated, response to our exclusion from the process that led to the adoption of the Australian Constitution in 1901. Participants in the regional dialogues and those at Uluru showed overwhelming consensus around 3 proposals. First, for a constitutionally established representative body that would give First Nations a voice directly to the Parliament. The establishment of a Makarrata Commission to supervise the making of treaties with us, and at the same time, a process of local and regional truth-telling which could form the basis for genuine reconciliation. These three things, voice, treaty, truth, were the key consensus demands that arose from the delegates and were captured in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. The delegates made a conscious decision to address the Uluru Statement to the Australian people. This was based on a faith that ordinary Australians of goodwill, if they heard our voice, would not run away from us, just as they did in the 1967 referendum when over 90% of Australians voted yes to change the Constitution to ensure that, amongst other things, we were to be counted as Australians for the first time. The immediate response from many of those in politics and the media to the Uluru Statement showed the wisdom of our delegates in seeking to speak directly to the Australian people. The carefully thought out and extensively debated proposals for truth-telling and treaty making were attacked by many mainstream commentators as if the history of dispossession hadn't happened. The proposal to create a voice to the federal parliament was immediately and wrongfully painted as an attempt to establish a third chamber of parliament and was dismissed out of hand by our then Prime Minister, Mr Turnbull. But the proposal to establish a voice to Parliament through constitutional reform is not an attempt to set up a third House of Parliament, and it is not an attempt by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to gain something at the expense of non-Indigenous Australians. Instead, it was something that could be of great benefit to all of us. Of course, we believe that it would lead to better, more effective processes to address the intergenerational disadvantage that many of our communities suffer. It would address the long-standing historical inequity by which we are effectively excluded from many of the forums in which decisions are made about our lives, in fact, every aspect of our lives. The voice to Parliament would address this imbalance at a national level, at the same time hearing from people at local and even remote communities across the country. It would be of great symbolic and practical value to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. However, in addition, I believe the voice to Parliament could be a gift of great value to the Australian people as a whole. It could be a place where we bring our stories and our knowledge to the symbolic centre of contemporary government. And this country could really use our knowledge now, particularly when it comes to looking after the environment on which all our lives and economy are based. The bushfires. Well, if there's anything us mob know, and it's about fire. How to use it creatively to promote life and productivity, how to manage it, how to prevent it becoming destructive and harmful. The rivers, we have always known how to manage them, how to take the water we need, but always leave enough for other living creatures. The oceans and the reef, we have thousands of years' experience at looking after them sustainably. Now, I'm not saying for a minute that we have all the answers, but I can say that as First Nations people, we have accumulated 65,000 years plus or more knowledge about how to care for this land. You know, you might think after 65,000 years we might know something. You might, a lot of people don't. The voice to Parliament, enshrined in the Constitution, would be a permanent place in which we share that knowledge and use it to help all people now living here and to help prevent the kind of suffering we have seen in the last few months. This is the promise held up by the delegates who gathered at Uluru, trusting in the decency and sense of justice of the Australian people. But I want to contrast what the delegates asked for and what the current government is offering. The government is setting up a process for establishing a voice to government through legislation. But as we have seen so many times in the past, a body established by legislation can just as easily be abolished by legislation. And now, just a few days ago, the Minister has announced there will be a referendum next year I think he's offering what we call the minimalist approach, a few sentences about us, some sort of pretty words, some poetry, and that'll be it. I mean, tick that box, we've dealt with the blackfellas. What the delegates at Uluru asked for is different. What the Uluru Statement asks for is a voice to Parliament, which is enshrined in the Constitution, because it will make it a permanent part of the life of the nation and not subject to the whims of the government of the day. What the Uluru Statement asks for is real constitutional reform, not the maintenance of the status quo where our representative bodies can be dissolved at the stroke of a pen. What the statement asks for is a constitutionally enshrined voice which also recognises us as sovereign peoples. Because we are Australia's first peoples, this is our place and we're not going anywhere. So my main request to you here this evening is to support the delegates who gathered at Uluru 3 years ago and support the Uluru Statement from the heart, despite what you might hear and see every day, and it's going to get worse, believe me. Support its call for a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. Accept it as a gift from us, First Peoples, to all Australians in the spirit of justice and reconciliation. Thank you.